Hi boys and girls, this is Brad at EastCoastAngel. Just going to do a quick LED full teardown. As you can see in the picture, we've got a whole bunch of tools. I'm going to give you a rundown of what they are. Right alongside here are all the Allen keys that you're going to need in order to tear this down properly. I've got a wooden spoon. I usually use it to push out the internals. Doesn't scratch the inside of the tubes, and I found that it works great so far. Got a couple of LCD LED tools right here. One is for the RAM, and it backs out the RAM here. It's got two prongs in it. Fits right in the RAM, backs it right out. The Lpr tool is good for adding shims to the Lpr big piston. It screws right into the front of it, and then you can pull it out. You can put shims in it. Helps you fine tune the gun. Over here is a Leatherman. I usually use it to tap the internals out of the reg, and because it's a nice hard flat surface. The Lpr Gauge, you're going to need this if you want to fine tune your gun properly. A lot of people will go ahead and put their gun together and want to know why it's really loud or why it's not shooting. Most of the time that little gauge right there that screws in right where this volley is will give you the answer. I use Planet Eclipse grease. I found that it works really well and it's readily available. A pair of jeweler's pliers, that's for the snap ring that's going to be found inside this reg. I use this for a couple of things. Never to take off a reg off of a gun, but for leverage and more leverage. You'll see why in a little bit. A screwdriver, you're going to see why we have that. It's only used like once in the video. And then of course a pick for your O-rings. Now we're going to go ahead and move those things out of the way, and we're going to get started. Sometimes I like to also keep some paper towels handy for wiping down the parts as you're pulling them. I find that it's also good to use. That way you can see where your parts are, what you've already taken out, and where you want to go from there. Again, this is all going to be stuff that you can do. I'm trying to make the videos more user friendly. And here we go. Essentially what we have here is a pretty stock basic LED, very first Angel built. They're high pressure. You can use tanks ranging from 450 psi input all the way up to 1,000. The regs, high pressure reg is good at cutting down that initial charge of air that you're going to get from your tank. Again, these things shoot amazing. For how old they are, the technology back then was advanced, and they just managed to nail it right out of the gate. And this platform is essentially one of probably the most widely recognized, just the triple tube. You've got all of your internals are going to be on the driver's side, as I call it. If you're looking down this side here, it's actually, all your internals are here, and then your battery tubes right here. And it's just an amazing gun. Single trigger ones are really nice and comfortable to use, and just overall they're really great. I have one myself. I love using it. I take it out, I get all of the what is that questions, and then I go out and I actually use it, and people are amazed at how well it shoots in comparison to today's markers. It's not so bad, believe it or not. Mine's really quiet. I've got it tuned right, right properly. It's taken a little while to get it there though. But again, here we go. Essentially what I want to do is I want to try to take as much of the stuff off that I'm not going to need, that's going to be in the way. First thing is going to be your airline. Typically you'll have an ASA on a marker. Sometimes it'll come off easy, sometimes it may be a little bit more difficult. But at this point I also like to try to essentially take off all the stuff that isn't going to be needed immediately, isn't is going to be in the way. I usually will leave this on here. There's no real reason to take it off, but essentially we start with the mini reg. I usually like to do this just to kind of get a rough idea of where we're at with this, you know, with the marker. Usually you can tell by, you know, the regs internals whether the rest of the gun is going to be, you know, good or not. Recently, I've been running into a lot of guns that are being revitalized or restored, and they've been sitting for a long time. This is no exception. This one, a little while ago, you know, I got kind of like a calling for doing a bunch of videos and updating my videos. So I put out the word and I got a whole bunch of, oh, this has been sitting in my closet, or oh, this has been sitting in my basement for however many years. And I said, go ahead, let's bring them on in. So here we go. Again, your jeweler's pliers, really easy. You just go down in there. There's a small little circlip that's embedded in a groove around the reg. Just go ahead and pull that, you know, kind of want to try to get one of the edges off and out of the groove, and then you can kind of pull it up. Always make sure you kind of contain your parts though, so you don't have your area full of all kinds of other guns and whatnot, because it'll get kind of tricky. These parts, this one's is got a bit of a spring to it, so if you're pulling it out of this and you're not in an area where you can contain it, it could fly away, and I've seen them disappear. I've had people that have actually, you know, asked me, oh, do you have one of those as a replacement or whatnot? And of course I do, but it's still, you know, it's good to kind of contain all of your parts when you can. Right now I'm taking out the velocity adjuster. You know, I just do that because I want to get a rough idea and a feel for the, you know, for the threads, make sure that they're clean. You know, sometimes people will, you know, stuff will get inside them and they won't really know that there's something in there, some grit, some dirt, depending on where you're playing. And, you know, the, you know, threads can get kind of gnarled up. And then, of course, when you're turning that back in, you may not notice it and you might end up doing some damage. That one felt pretty clean. This reg has been completely filthy. And so what I'm going through now is, you know, just showing you the initial breakdown and everything. Now, you're going to notice when I take this gun apart that there are no O-rings on any of the parts. Well, that is in tune my fault. When I was starting to do the first video, I did not realize that my phone was quite full, and it shut off the video at 7 minutes. Even though I did a full complete teardown, I did not realize that I was not filming, you know, for the last like 15 of it. So as you're going through, you're going to notice there are no O-rings on any parts because I've already replaced, you know, taken them off, and I've already taken everything apart on this gun. I put it all back together just for this video. So here we go. I like to, again, my Leatherman, like to tap on the, you know, just to get that one part out. You'll see right there, that's the, you know, the piston that's inside it. There's a whole bunch of little shims that are inside it too. You don't have to necessarily keep tapping that to get them all out. You can use a pick, in which, you know, you can see all of these have green, you know, weirdness on them. This piston does. It's going to need to be fully cleaned up. All of the shims are going to need to be clean. I have extra shims, so I may just replace them, because who knows how compressed they were. At some point they might end up losing their ability to you know, to regulate the air properly, in which, you know, case then, you know, replacing them, easy enough. Again, all these parts have been already taken out of the gun. All the O-rings were removed. I wanted to do a complete, you know, virgin teardown, but unfortunately, like I said before, my phone did not allow me to do that. I'm going to show you. If you look at this piston here, you'll notice the very top seal is almost flat. It's like not even there. This is going to need to be replaced, this whole unit, mainly because this seal here has been crimped onto the top, and if you take that out and try to put another one in, it's just not going to stay, especially with this being a high pressure marker. So that part's going to get replaced. But the reg is completely torn down at that point. There's no other reason to take anything else apart. The elbow is in good shape. The air fitting's in good shape. Then, you know, go ahead and leave it. If it's not, then you want to attach a wrench here, probably want to attach a strap wrench here, or you know, put something to protect it, and then you can back it off. You can see here, this one's got some idiot marks on it, where somebody put a vise, you know, something clamping on it, and, you know, marked it all up. it may or may not be a big deal to some people. I personally like to keep them as clean as possible, so I try not to use anything that's going to damage the metal when removing stuff off of a gun. And now we've gotten to that point. The next step, I like to take the front vertical ASA off, and this is where the wrench comes in handy. Just go ahead, break it loose a little bit, just because sometimes, you know, they're torqued on there. There's really no need to go crazy when tightening these bolts and all of the little screws and stuff that are on Angels. People do it, but they don't realize that there's a certain point where you can actually reverse the ability for something to seal it if you tighten it too much. You can see this screw has got all kinds of gunk and everything on it. You know, clean them up. Use a toothbrush, use some Dawn, get them nice and cleaned up. You can put oil on them after when you go to put them back together if you're afraid of rust or whatnot. These are black oxide. They will rust at some point. There are some places that have stainless steel. Awesome. You can use it. Be aware though, stainless steel is soft. It's not necessarily the best to use on aluminum. You'll find that sometimes it's so soft that it strips out a little easier. Again, you know, it's really to each his own, and how long you plan on having the gun compared to how long you want to, you know, how many times you're going to tear it down. I typically tend to tear my guns down twice a year. That's complete tear down, all new O-rings, yada yada yada. There is an O-ring on here, there's an O-ring here. Again, those got pulled because when I got done with them, they looked like that. And I mean, the reg was leaking pretty significant. You know, it is just going to be common that it's going to do that, especially if the marker's been sitting for a long time. Now I'm going to take off the grips because I want to get to the board. I want to unplug the harness. And while we're on that subject, I want to let you know that the harness is indeed fragile. So you want to make sure that when getting into this harness that use a little bit of precaution. Don't yank on stuff. If something feels like it's, you know, stuck or it's snagged, because there's stuff inside here for the battery that it can get, you know, stuck on. There's sharp edges in the frame on the inside of the body. And if you start pulling on stuff, the wires are like spaghetti, and not spaghetti that's been cooked. We're talking about fragile, non-cooked spaghetti. It'll break. What I like to do though is I like to show people there's a couple different ways that you can go about taking the board out, and you can go about undoing the harness. One is you can take it like this, undo the screw right there. You can flip the board up, and you can put your finger right on the wires and everything like that, and you can kind of work the board back and forth. Also works for putting it back together. Or you can leave it screwed in, and you can use a pick, and you can push on the lip of the connector with the board still in the frame. Voila, comes right out. Now here comes the fun part. When taking the frame off, you are going to want to make sure that you don't yank on the frame, because there are still components that are attached to the frame, to the harness. Remember that harness we were talking about that's pretty fragile. You'll see why in a minute. This harness is actually in great shape, especially for the year and everything like that. Okay, so when we go and we separate the body, you'll notice that, well, I already unplugged the harness, so why isn't it coming out? There's a switch here, power switch, that's got 2 screws in it, and the micro switch where these 2 pins are, that's got 2 wires to it. Here's your trigger spring for your trigger return. You're always going to want to take that out and keep it somewhere where you can find it. I've seen those things go across a room before and never to be seen again. I have absolutely no idea where they go after that. I usually am really good about cleaning. You know, in my area, I've got OCD, in which I know where everything is. I know where, you know, everything went. And sometimes I have literally been at a loss for where a spring is gone. I think they just disappear. Now you push out those pins using your little trusty pick, flip the frame over, and you can pull each one out. Again, they're round. They will roll if you put them on a flat surface. It's got an angle to them, and those are just as tricky as the spring. Sometimes you won't see them ever again. You flip it back over, and now we have the power switch screws. They're usually pretty grimy because they're exposed to all the elements. They are very rarely replaced. I will be using a wire wheel that's attached to a Dremel to clean them up, to clean up the heads, clean up the threads. Again, I'm very particular. When somebody gets a marker from me after I've done servicing it, you'll find that it is very clean. You know, everything works properly like it should. Now, I do like to point out, you know, sometimes people will, you know, say, oh, well, you know, do you pull the trigger out? Do you, you know, what do you do, you know, with it? You know, most of the time what I do is I kind of give it a test. I see if I hold the trigger at an angle and I go like that, is it going to come right out or is it sticking? With this one, it is kind of like right in the middle. The pin always comes out. If it's facing, the frame is facing you, it always comes out towards you. Or if you're facing and holding the gun, it would be considered the driver's side of the gun. So the pin always comes out to the left, in which you put in your punch and then force it out. There's actually, you know what? I'm sorry about that. I think I told you the exact opposite. In which that happens. Actually, goes out the right side. And I apologize. Use a long punch. You can see that came right out. You're going to want to do that on a solid surface. You know, my bench just built, nice and rugged, and it will absorb the impact, but still give you a nice firm surface. And there you go. The trigger's out. The pin will be cleaned up with a Dremel tool. Again, when I was mentioning that about the pin, I've got myself a little bit confused. Some of the older you know, platforms, the other platforms have the pin that comes out this way. It's got a small little grub screw. We'll be getting into that with other videos, but again, the pin will come out the right, and if you actually looked at it, you'd notice that the pin was kind of recessed in a little bit, which kind of gave me an indication that that's exactly how it should come out. If you try to put it out the left side, I think it's going to be it's going to give you a little bit more of a struggle. You know, again, sometimes I've seen them go in either side, but for the most part, you usually want to take it, and you usually want to go from the you know, from the right side. All right, there's that. And next, we like to take the pull pin breech knob right off. Like to be able to keep this whole area exposed. You can take the bolt out, you can leave the bolt in until you get to the ram part. It's not a big deal. Right now we're at that point where the back plate's going to need to come off. Usually there's 2 screws. There was only 1 that was included. I'll be putting 2 brand new screws on this one anyway, because this other screw, it's kind of beat. I did notice that a regular size Allen key wasn't fitting in this one, so this tells me that that needs to be replaced. We'll just go ahead and throw that right over there in the trash. Now you can pull the back plate off and kind of move it off to the side. You can see all of these wires. All these wires are very thin. They're very fragile. Be careful. When you go to pull your breech pin out, you'll notice that there's another spring. And when you're taking the back plate off and you're noticing the spring sits up a little bit, it will sometimes pop right out. So kind of contain it so it doesn't go ricocheting all over the place. And if you notice, the two look very different. when putting them back in, you're going to notice right away, if you put the trigger spring in the back plate, it won't allow you to open up the breech, mainly because it doesn't compress enough like the actual breech pin spring does. It's one of those things, you'll do it once and you probably won't do it again. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and take the ram out. Just go ahead and unscrew it. Oh, come back here. Just go ahead and unscrew it. And there's going to be O-rings and there's going to be more resistance, but like I said, I've already torn this down and had to put it all back together. There's no O-rings, so it all comes right out. The one thing you're going to want to do with this is you're going to want to check your snap ring, which is, this gun hasn't been apart. This is the first time it's been apart probably since it was built in the factory, because it still had that sticker over the back, which indicates that yes, the snap ring is set properly. Here you go onto its next assembly. You go ahead and you back this out, and you will see on the back side of this is an O-ring. It's tucked in down there. There's all kinds of factory green grease, and you go ahead and you pull that out. That's going to be replaced also. When you go to put it all back together, if you notice that your gun is not shooting properly, it's not shooting at all. It has like a clicking sound. It could easily be your snap ring adjustment needs adjusting, in which case this could need to be backed out, or it could need to be just tuned just a little bit, because this is going to have a bit of resistance before it actually activates. And then when it does, you'll notice, when the gun's running properly and everything, that this has been adjusted properly. You may need to leave the back plate off of this, though, when doing fine tuning, if you really like to get involved. I know a few people that do, and when it comes to that, sometimes leaving things open to and accessible, a lot easier than putting everything back together and hoping and praying that everything works. All right, so now we've pretty much gotten to that point where we can go a couple of ways about this. Right now, what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to take the ball detent out. And you can see this one is not working properly. The ball is inside it. The spring is still there, but there's all kinds of junk. So this is going to get soaked, and hopefully we'll get that to return back to its former glory. It shouldn't be a problem. I've had to do that a number of times before. The one thing I like to do at this point is I like to pull the pins from the underside of the body. I usually use my Leatherman for that. I've found a couple of these pins require a little bit more coaxing, but for the most part they usually will just come right out with a pair of pliers, and just like that. Now everything's ready to go. I typically will tend to try to put something down here when using my trusty wooden spoon and pushing the parts out the front. Again, this one's been taken apart at some point, before me, mainly because the LPR was just like this. The shims were all stacked together. These shims are they're rusty, they're kind of gnarly. It does have these, this is an LCD LPR, or a variation of it. And it's rebuildable, but there's a good chance that we're just going to end up swapping it out. This valve has definitely seen better days. It's gritty. I'm not going to reuse it. The stem is no good. It's got oxidization all over it. So we're going to go ahead and put those over there in the not going to use pile. Now we've got the tube is empty. I can tell that this is going to need a good cleaning. And then from there we can do a number of things, but what I'd like to do next, I like to take out the battery. Essentially, it doesn't just slide out the front, but I'm going to take the front plug off just so you can see it. And now we're going to look into the back of the gun. You're going to want to see this little guy right here. That is your battery connector. You go ahead and you undo it. Sometimes if it's stuck together, you know, like if it's really like right there, it's, you know, pieced together, you can go ahead and you can put your pick right in between the two pieces and you can force them apart. And at that point, your battery will likely still want to snag on stuff, but for the most part will come right out. This one's getting a whole new battery, but when you do take it out, take a look at your connectors and see if they're corroded. If it is, you're gonna want to look at A, cleaning them, or B, replacing it. So now we're at that point where all of this stuff has got to come out. So you go ahead and you start by fishing the switch through the hole. You know, again, try to be a little gentle with it because of the fact that as soon as you break one of these wires, trust me, soldering them is no fun. It's not a difficult thing, especially if you've done it before, but if you've never done it before and you break one of these wires off, you're going to feel like it's the end of the world. I solder probably 2 or 3 times a week, you know, just because of, you know, aging wires and connectors and stuff like that. But that's essentially what you want your harness to look like when you pull it out of the gun. Now, the next and last stage of getting the wires out of the gun and out of your way is there's 2 small screws on the end of the solenoid. You just go ahead and you undo those. You don't have to take them completely out of the block though. You're going to see what I mean in just a second. Go ahead and loosen those up and pop that out. Now the screws, you can go ahead and leave with the block. Put it all together, just kind of put it off to the side. You know, check your connections, check, make sure that no wires are frayed or no wires are damaged. Typically they're not, but you know what, you might get lucky and maybe one of them is, you know, seen better days. And at that point, you really have to make a decision on, you know, how far and how deep into it you want to go. I've seen people that have sent guns in at that point and said, I can't do the soldering, so can you fix this for me? And it's not a problem, we can do that. Now you're going to want to, there's a set screw on the top of the solenoid in which you're going to want to back that out. Use the proper Allen key, because if you don't and you strip it, it's a process to take that out after. So you go ahead and you remove that. Now we're at, you know, literally at like one of the last stages of this teardown. And we have to get the solenoid out. There's a plastic plug right here. What I do is I typically will put my trusty spoon right there, and I will tap the plug in the solenoid right out the back. It's usually very easy to do. Most of the time the O-rings around the solenoid are, you know, still got grease and still got oil from the factory, so they will slide right out just like that. You know, after you get it to a certain point, you can grab onto the back of it and you can just, you know, back it out that way. You can see there's all kinds of interesting stuff that's coming with this gun. It's definitely been sitting for a while. So you go ahead and you just pull that right out. You have your little plug here. That's going to need to be cleaned up also. You can use soap and hot water for that. And now we've kind of gotten to the very last stage, which is breech pin removal. I've had a lot of people ask me for it, to put it in with the video as we're doing it. I'm going to do it on every single marker that I've got coming through. So we're going to show you exactly how to do it here. First, you're going to need a screw, and it's going to be, you know, one that you can pick up at a, you know, mom and pop hardware store that has a small, you know, like machine micro screw department. And I believe this is a 1.5 millimeter. You go ahead and you thread it on into the front. Some of these have grub screws that are in the front also. Some of these do not. If you happen to get lucky and they don't, awesome. This one has grub screws. One of them's already been removed. I'm just showing you that it's just one less step. You go ahead and thread that into the pin. I like to use something of this nature for the leverage part of it. And just like that, you pull them out. If they get to a certain point and you find that it's difficult, and like you've run out of leverage and whatnot, you can always use a pair of regular pliers, and then you can back, and then you can pull it out that way, you know, if need be. I found that that some of these pins come out super easy, and then I've also got massive horror stories about how difficult they can be. As you can see on this one, we still got the set screw there. Again, picking the right Allen key or Allen wrench is utmost importance with these guns, because if one of these strips out that's still inside the body, well, let's just say you're probably going to be sending it out to a machinist that does work and can extract those. They can be a real big pain. Again, you go ahead and you take that screw and you thread it into the back of the pin. I like to put a good couple of threads into it, because I've seen people that have threaded them in and pulled them out, and when they did, they pulled out the threads on the back of the breech pin and made it harder for them to take them out later on. As you can see, that just kind of came right out. Best thing to do when putting these back in is grease them. Put a good amount of grease right on there, slide them back in. They won't get, you know, they won't get all gunked up. If you notice this pin's in really good shape, go ahead and hit that with a wire wheel. Clean out those threads. Put a little bit of grease on that when you go to put it back in. Also, the one thing I do want to point out is if your breech block does not have an O-ring, you can, if you're finding that they're falling out, you can take in the groove and you can scrape away the anodizing. And then when you put a little bit of super glue in there and you put the O-ring back in, it will set and grab a little bit better. Again, you're going to want to use that. You're going to get better efficiency. The gun's going to be a little quieter because all of the air that's down in the tube is transferring through that hole, and it's not shooting out all the way around this area. Again, that is our full LED teardown, breech pins, the whole nine, and it was you know, a pretty uneventful teardown. One thing I do want to point out though is if you ever run into an issue in which you feel like you're in over your head, you can always contact me. You can go on to EastCoastAngel New Hampshire or on Facebook, or you can contact me through you know, my email. All of the contact information will be left you know, in the video at the very bottom of the header description, and hopefully we can you know, we can get you running if you feel like this is a little bit more than you want to get into. Again, we've got parts, we've got able bodies to make sure that your Angel is up and running, and we would love to hear from you. If there's any questions or you have any comments, you can go ahead and post them below. But again, thank you very much. This is Brad from EastCoastAngel.